Hey guys, Nick Yuskevich back again with Daily Fantasy Winners and the next episode of Tee to Green. And it is for the RBC Canadian Open, and it is a tournament in Oakville, Ontario, Canada. And not too much to get into for this, just the general details is with the tournament. This is going to definitely be a little bit more with the golf course and the strategy angle. But just so you know, when we're thinking about this in terms of the season, this is the last week we're probably going to see a very weak field as far as the PGA Tour tournaments are concerned for the rest of the season. It won't be for the rest of the year, just the rest of the season, because the season ends at the end of September or very beginning of October, pending the exact dates of the President's Cup. But obviously, as you take a look on DraftKings and FanDuel, it's a very weak field this week because this tournament is sandwiched between the Open Championship and the WGC Bridgestone, which is obviously next week. And then we have the PGA Championship right after that. Then it's the Wyndham, which is it's an okay field. It's a decent field. Not great, but not terrible like this week. And then we are jumping right on into the FedEx Cup playoff. So that's basically the reason why it's a little bit weaker this week. It's the last chance for everybody to catch a breather. And then other than that, it's just the traditional top 70 plus ties make the cut here. It's just the usual PGA Tour tournament like that. About 150 players in the field. And so the golf course details, let's just get on into that. It's going to be at Glen Abbey this year. And if you've done course or tournament research here so far, you'll recognize that Glen Abbey has frequently hosted this event, but by no means has it hosted it all the years. Glen Abbey was the host in 2016, 2015, and 2013. It was not in 2014 and 2012. And if you get before that, it came in at a few points, and then it was just a very inconsistent rotation. And then if you go way back, Glen Abbey hosted it a bunch. But needless to say, for what's important and relevant to you guys, you can take a look at 2016, you can take a look at 2015, and you can take a look at 2013. That's what's probably going to be the most important here. Details for this year, though. Par 72 for Glen Abbey, tipping out at 7,253 yards. Not too long of a golf course, especially for a par 72. There are 4 par 5s on this course as a result. And all the par 5s definitely have eagle potential. There were over 10 eagles, I think maybe even as many as a dozen eagles on every par 5 last year. So length, and I was taking a look at specifically who made the eagles last year and who was in this field. The length advantage for eagles is very minimal. I would not focus on it at all. You can emphasize it a tiny bit if you want, if you're making a model or whatever, but it's a very minimal influence comparison to what I'm going to mention here in the strategy angle. So just wanted to point that out. As far as the difficulty of the golf course, it's a pretty easy course. The winning score here usually is about like 15 under. I think last year Jonathan Vegas won like 12 or 13 under. There's been some years where it's been like 17, 18, something like that. So it's pretty easy. There are some penalty strokes that come into play with water hazards. It especially comes into play on the second shots, or I should say the approach shots, because it comes into play on par 3s as well. But other than that, it's the length of the golf course isn't bad. The rough length isn't bad. It's not incredibly tight. There are a few tighter holes, but it's still not incredibly horrible. And then the green difficulty isn't that bad. So it's pretty much, there's nothing incredibly difficult about the golf course is the bottom line. So that's why you see the winning score at around 15 under every year. So anyways, let's just get into the strategy angle. This is very straightforward this week. Strokes gained tee to green as usual. Strokes gained approaching the green is by far the biggest element that shows up of the 4 strokes gained elements. And again, like I said, the water comes into play in particular on the approach shots. And there are a few greens that are bigger, and it's important to kind of get it in the right section at a few points for the few greens that are a little more difficult. There are even a few greens that are actually a little bit smaller where, it's still just kind of tough to hit to certain little points if there are certain little corners type of a thing where they try to make the golf course a little bit more difficult. I'm just, and I'm nitpicking this a little bit, quite frankly, but and I'm doing this just because as far as the statistics go, strokes gained approaching the green is the one that shows up the most. I know that's been kind of a common theme a lot of the time, but for example, like just to kind of say why strokes gained approaching the green is showing up quite a bit. If you want to know why, like Jordan Spieth's having like a good bounce back year this year, not as good as his 2015 season by any means, but if you want to take a look at this season, his strokes gained approaching the green is off the charts. And that basically, other than the few bomb putts he made at the end of Sunday's round, his strokes gained approaching the green bailed him out time and time and time again throughout the entire Open Championship. He hit under 40% of fairways on 3 of the 4 rounds, on Thursday, Friday, and Sunday. That's absolutely remarkable for what that golf course was presenting. And you can say he had a little bit of luck off the tee in terms of some of the breaks he got, and that's fine. But his stroke gain approach in the green was just absolutely superb. So again, stroke gain approach in the green definitely shows up a lot of the time here at some of these tournaments, and this week is no exception. And then, anyways, but besides stroke gain approach in the green, the other thing that shows up, and this is a typical DFS thing, it's birdie or better percentage. This is a pretty easy golf course. There are going to be a lot of birdies out there, a lot of eagles out there, so that's pretty straightforward. Reese, you can take a look at recent form as everybody else will. And then obviously, of course, they'll look at our strokes gained putting tool regression. I always want to keep emphasizing that, especially in these weaker tournaments. When you get some of these PGA Tour players that have been around the block a few times, I think that's when it can particularly come in handy sometimes, actually, in some of these weaker fields. As far as a couple people that were just asking about, by the way, of the strokes gained tee to green regression tool, that is definitely going to be a good tool to use. I don't think it's that good of a thing to use actually right now, though, I tried to emphasize this to a few people, and I'll just say it here. It's just one of those things where it's going to probably come into handy more when we get into the fall season, and then also in the beginning of the 2017-18 season, meaning it's going to be the beginning of that season, the fall of 2017, and then the winter, kind of beginning of the 2018 portion of the season, and that's because that's when there's a little bit more of an off season, and people can kind of regroup and work on some things in the off season. They can reassess, because a lot of the times when you see that regression over a season, a lot of people will take a look at that and work on that on their games, or they'll switch clubs, switch coaches, whatever. They'll retweak things, whatever they want to do to enhance it, or they just practice more, whatever it might be. Maybe that's something going on in their lives. I don't know, but. If we're talking about somebody that's like, in their like late 20s, early 30s, like kind of in their prime, they're traditionally a very good strokes gained tee to green player, and then they just had one bad year, well, then we can expect probably some kind of a bounce back, in regression. Or if they're a bad strokes gained tee to player for a good portion of their career, and they all of a sudden had a really good one, we could probably maybe expect a little bit of regression in the negative sense. So in any case, that's just when we're in the peak of the PGA Tour season and where recent form does come into play a little bit, I just don't think it's going to mean as much. So just wanted to kind of clarify that for everybody. And so that's pretty much it, though, other than the picks, of course, with the most expensive players. So we'll just get right on into that. So obviously it's a very weak field at the top, especially on DraftKings, and when you take a look at the pricing in terms of how it's structured. Dustin Johnson at $12,200, Matt Kuchar at $11.4K, and then Charlie Hoffman at $10.3K. So, and obviously Hoffman, and I'm not going to get into that. Anyways, Dustin Johnson, we're comparing Dustin Johnson to Matt Kuchar because they're by far the two most expensive here. Anyways, when we're taking a look at everything, I don't care what the golf course is. I don't care if Dustin's not in his elite form, and I don't care if Kuchar's in amazing form. Dustin Johnson is better than Matt Kuchar by more than $800 on DraftKings, and I don't mean that in any way, shape, or form disrespect to Kuchar. It's just because Dustin Johnson is the best player in the world. It's too much of an overcorrection after last week, and comparing Kuchar to like some of the other guys that are in the field. So in any case, I would just say if you're doing GPPs, I would definitely prefer Dustin Johnson over Matt Kuchar. Kuchar's going to get a ton of ownership percentage, both cash and GPP, but it more matters in GPP. In cash, he's going to get a boatload of ownership, I'm sure. But they're both. But I'm not saying if you're making a bunch of lineups, you do not have to fade either of them by any means of the imagination, because of course Kuchar could still win the tournament, and that's obviously a little bit dangerous. But in GPPs, I definitely prefer Dustin over Kuchar at those prices. Because Brandt Snedeker withdrew at 9,800, Charlie Hoffman at 10.3. He's kind of isolated there because the next cheapest guy is Tony Finau at 9,500, and then Matt Kuchar all the way up, of course, at $11,400. It's kind of funny. Hoffman's kind of isolated, and it'll be interesting to see what his ownership will be, because you would think that Hoffman should get some pretty good GPP value in that spot, because he's more expensive than all the guys that are quote unquote in the same skill level as him. but obviously not super expensive. But then you realize that there is just nobody else around him, that it can't gobble up any of his ownership, if you will. So I don't know. I still think Charlie Hoffman will probably get like kind of that 15 to 20% ownership. I could be a little bit off on that. It's a little bit tougher to predict. It's kind of a unique circumstance here. But I do think Charlie Hoffman is a good play. His strokes gained approaching the green is decent this year. His strokes gained off the tee is great, and his strokes gained tee to green is great, and his birdie or better percentage is awesome. And so I think Charlie Hoffman's a good GPP play. If you are doing cash format, I personally would just, because there's so much good value in that 9K to kind of like that mid 7K range. It really goes all the way down actually through the 6K range, but in particular, it's the 9K range to the mid 7K range. I would just actually do cash formats. I would just gobble up that entire spot from the 9K to 7K. That's probably the route I would go. You could grab Kuchar if you wanted to in cash, and then or DJ, and then just grab like 5 of the 7K guys. That's fine too. It's not like we're splitting hairs a little bit here on what the best strategy is, especially for cash. You just want to grab the chalk in the best plays, of course. But when it comes to GPPs, certainly Dustin over Kuchar as far as the 10K or the 10 plus K in my opinion. Charlie Hoffman's fine at 10 plus K or 10.3K specifically as well. And then as far as the best GPP play, in my opinion, below that, kind of that 9K range, I really like Kevin Chappell at $9,000. He has missed his last 2 cuts, which should lower his ownership some, which I think is a very good thing, because Kevin Chappell, I do think is, well, I don't think he is actually, one of the best strokes gained approaching the green players consistently every year. He's at like 35th this year, which is still very good. Obviously, his iron play is just awesome, and his wedge play is great. And so this is obviously a tremendous course fit for him. And anyways, just looking at some of the other guys around him, I would just much rather take Kevin Chappell than some of the others. And so it'll be nice. I think you can still get Kevin Chappell probably maybe around like 15% ownership in this GPP, maybe 20% the absolute worst. But I think that's, you may even get as low as 10. Who knows? It's a little, this week's going to be a little bit tough to kind of detect ownership with so many good values out there. So, but it won't be over the top. So that's a good thing. So Kevin Chappell's my guy for GPPs in the 9K range, and I'll have all the usual lists up on DailyFantasyWinners.com as usual for you guys. So anyways, thank you for watching. I'm at Nicky Skevich on Twitter. Daily Fantasy Winners is on Twitter at DFantasyWinners, and then you can definitely subscribe to our YouTube channel, which would be awesome. All right, thanks guys, and good luck.